You mentioned something that I think is very important, that feeling that there's no path forward. When we go through the worst types of grief, I think that's the one thing we have in common. We feel like this is the one I'm not going to be able to survive. This is the one I'm not going to be able to overcome. And we feel like is the end of the road. And I'm wondering, did it feel like that for you when your mother got this diagnosis?
Later, it sometimes felt like I was falling. It felt like I was just falling through space, and I didn't know where I would land if I would survive the landing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my mother's strength that persisted throughout her disease. And the people who have in your audience who have dealt with an Alzheimer's or dementia patient, and I know there are many of them because it affects millions and millions of families in this country, um, know that there is always a core of someone inside that person who seems so lost to us. When I found the most important thing with my mother was to be present, to live in the present. That this disease told me that I had to meet my mother in the present because that's all she had. She had the moment, the pinhole in time that she lived in because the past was being wiped out for her and she had no concept of the future. So I had to find how to meet her in that moment. And sometimes it was just being with her.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in the middle, our tendencies when our loved ones begin to talk in a way that we think is irrational or unrealistic. Like my mother would say that she had a conversation with someone that morning, and I'd say, "Oh, who?" And it would be someone who's been dead for years.
Yeah.
My tendency as a son is to say, "No, no, you didn't talk to that person. That person, don't you realize it? Don't you remember they died 15 years ago?" And I realized that that was the wrong thing to say. Totally. The right thing to say, what took me a while to learn was, oh, well, how was that conversation? What did it just talk about? And, in that moment, I was able to meet her where she was instead of trying to drag her back to where I was, which was, someone without dementia. Um, and I realized as we went through this process, this this slow process of grief as I lost her and I lost her every day or every week or every month, a little bit more, that,
Mm-hmm.
if I stayed in the present, if I was there just with her, that sense of grief would lift because I couldn't love my mother if I was grieving her while she was still alive.
Um,
Because grief will block out that. We think, I'm going to say something that I've said before and written about, and people sometimes don't agree, but grief can be a very selfish thing, you know, because it's so self-centered, and it is a universal feeling that goes back. I mean, you can find cave paintings and ancient hieroglyphs describing grief. It's very fundamental to the human condition.
sure.
And even other, higher order of mammals seem to suffer, you know, the period of grief. It's important to us to know that people matter to us so much that we will suffer and when they die, when they leave us, when they go on. But grief can also be a blocker, you know. And if I wanted to be there for my mother as she was dying, um, I had to push through that grief, that sense of, oh, I've lost my mom, I've lost my mom, and just say, no, she's still here. And there's a way to reach out, and sometimes that's just holding a hand, sometimes just sitting there. During the last of my mother's time, I spent a lot of time just sitting with her, you know, and we didn't have to say anything. I just knew my presence meant something, and it's certainly her presence meant something to me. But it was all about being in the moment. So when I say grief is selfish, for me, sometimes it has been because it's so much about me. I mean, that's grief. It's your feelings, your emotions
Mm-hmm.
that you're experiencing. And I remind myself to be cautious about that. That it is a process and one that we have to push ourselves through. And sometimes we get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was very, very well said. And I understand what you're saying. You know, I tell people I think there are two sides to grief. We grieve for ourselves, what we're losing, and we supposedly grieve for what our loved one has lost, especially when in the case of death, when someone transitions to the next world. And I tell people, don't grieve for them because they're okay. The people that are making that transition to the next world, they're
Yes.
fine. And I was just this happens to be, I guess, dementia day, because I interviewed someone earlier this morning who lost her mother to another form of dementia, and we were talking about one of the lessons that we get from this is being in the moment, you know. And that's all we have with people with these diseases, with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. They don't have the past. We can't go back to that, but we can learn to be in the moment, which is something that we could all use in our lives. So they're here. That's, I think
Yes,
it teaches us something.
sure. It teaches us the power of the present, um, which is so important. And I live in New York City. I live down the street from the New York headquarters of the Franciscans. They have a beautiful church, the Church of St. Francis. And I would walk my dogs by them for a long time, for many years. And I loved the friars. They'd come out and bless my dogs, you know. And it's always so wonderful to bring your dog for a blessing. Um, but I would talk to them about my mother, and especially after she died. And this one friar said to me, "Look, she's in a better place. Think of the suffering that has ended. Think of how, she was a woman of tremendous faith, and she's moved on to something that is more wonderful than you can possibly imagine. So, if you're grieving, grieve for yourself, surely, but don't grieve for her because she's gone to something better, and you need to acknowledge that and let go, because you can't keep her here. And in your grief, you're sort of trapping your mother, not in any, ghost-like way, but
Right.
you're sort of emotionally trapping your mother here when
Hmm.
she's gone on. You know, I know the pain that you're in, but you have to at least celebrate that she's with God. She's in a better place where she needs to be. And, that helped me a lot. That
Hmm.
kept me from slipping over the edge all the time and just sort of sitting down and saying, don't know what to do with myself, you
Yeah,
know.
I think
Um,
it's both things at once. The grief is a normal process that we have to go through. It is it's that love that honors that person, and it says how important that person to us, and that perceived loss, that we feel like we've lost them. So we can't, I don't think we can bypass that. I don't think it's part of being human, but we can always hold on to this idea also, at the same time, that they're better off. They're out of the pain. Their memories are back intact. They're, and I believe, and I'd like to ask your thoughts on this. You were saying your mother would talk about talking to deceased people. How do you feel about when people are going through this and they're starting to say, so and so came to visit me yesterday? Time for a real quick break. Make sure you like and subscribe. Liking the video will show it to more people on YouTube, and subscribing will make sure you get access. Do you like what you just saw? Watch the full video now, and make sure you like and subscribe to see even more great videos from me.